Good evening. Please, may I remind you to switch off your mobile devices. Undersecretary Chan, Your Excellencies from the Diplomatic Corps, religious leaders, ladies and gentlemen. My name is April Kaminsky, and on behalf of the Hong Kong Holocaust and Tolerance Center, it is my honor and privilege to welcome you to tonight's annual ceremony to mark the United Nations Holocaust Memorial Day. The UN designated January 27th, the anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz death camp in 1945, as a worldwide day of commemoration in the memory of victims of the Holocaust. Recalling the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the UN General Assembly reaffirmed the Holocaust, which resulted in the murder of over 6 million Jews, along with countless members of other minorities, will forever be a warning to all people of the dangers of hatred, bigotry, racism, and prejudice. Tonight, it is our pleasure to welcome the Honorable Jack Chan, Undersecretary for Home Affairs, as the official government representative. We would also like to thank the government for granting us permission to use this historical facility once again. Additionally, we express our sincere appreciation to the Raymond and Nisette Barra Foundation for their very generous sponsorship of the UN Holocaust Memorial Week's program and educational events featuring Holocaust survivor Werner Reich. Our mission at HKHTC is primarily creating communal and classroom programs and exhibitions using the lessons of the Holocaust to develop awareness and educate current and future generations on the dangers of hatred and intolerance. Sadly, these tendencies are still prevalent in contemporary society. This evening, we will hear the story of Werner Reich, a survivor of several Nazi concentration camps and the infamous Death March. During his visit here to Hong Kong and Macau, we will have taken him to meet over 1,000 school and university students, and tonight he will share with us his firsthand experience of one of the most horrific and tragic episodes of human history. It is now my honor to call on Undersecretary Chan to say a few words on behalf of the Hong Kong government.
Honored guests, excellencies, friends, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is my great honor and privilege to be able to join you all this evening in this solemn occasion in remembrance of the Holocaust. May I, on behalf of the Hong Kong SAR government, first express our heartfelt gratitude to the Hong Kong Holocaust and Tolerance Center for organizing this important commemoration where we could all come together to pay tribute to the victims and to remember these darkest days in human history. The global community remembers the very painful lessons brought by the Holocaust and the tremendous sufferings of so many people of Jewish origin during the Second World War. On January 27 each year, the anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz death camps is also the annual International Day of Commemoration in memory of the Holocaust victims. The General Assembly of the United Nations has also adopted a resolution by consensus condemning without reserve all manifestations of religious intolerance, incitement, harassment, or violence against people or communities based on ethnic origin or religious belief. The commitment of inheritance and preservation of these memories in future generations is shared by all of us. I highly commend the important work of the Hong Kong Holocaust and Tolerance Center, which helps promote public education and awareness of the Holocaust. The center works closely with local schools to educate students about the Holocaust and the importance of tolerance in society. The exhibitions, lectures, seminars organized by the center and its resource center in South K1 also help enrich public knowledge of the Holocaust. The history and lessons of the Holocaust must be passed on to future generations and never be forgotten. Today, we are happy to have Mr. Werner Reich coming all the way to Hong Kong to share his history and his story. Mr. Reich is an eyewitness of the Holocaust who survived the Auschwitz. In the past years, he has been visiting many countries and devoting his time speaking to different groups about his stories in the concentration camps during the Holocaust. I'm happy to note that he will speak to students from more than 10 local and international schools during his brief stay in Hong Kong. His sharing will greatly benefit our younger generations. Remembrance of past crimes against the humanity can prevent occurring of such hideous crimes in future. May the annual Holocaust Remembrance Day not only be an act of showing respect to the many victims, but also a call for all of us to fight for a better future and world peace. Thank you very much.
We the Dead Accused. I continue to search and I find the motif of revenge, the motif of the demand for justice to be done, for justice to take its course in due time, in other messages too, in documents that survive from that place, and with which I had direct involvement and contact while still there, still in that metropolis, which I actually bore on my body into the post-war world. One is the farewell letter my mother wrote on the night of 30th June 1944, when we thought we would not survive the final liquidation of the camp. In one sentence, she expresses outrage at the cruelty of the ordeal. Why must the life of an innocent child end by this brutal hand? And the next sentence resonates with a demand to avenge the guiltless blood, the blood of the innocents that was shed there. It was only much later, when I became more familiar with the Jewish tradition, the language of prayer, that I recognized in her words the verse in which the worshippers call on God to avenge the blood of innocents. That verse continually reverberates in my mind. Hashem yikom dam nikiyim. God shall avenge the blood of innocents. There were other messages, other sparks that were preserved, some as artistic creation. I'm referring to a poem, the last work of an unknown poet of about 20 years of age, which was spared extinction on the night of the great annihilation of the members of the transport in which I too arrived in Auschwitz. On that night of the vast conflagration, a young woman standing at the entrance of the gas chamber took out, at the last minute, a sheaf of papers and handed them to one of the capos. The next day he handed them to my father, knowing he had ties with the Czech Jews. The poem is entitled, We the Dead Accused. No, there are no rotting crosses on our graves, and there are no arching tombstones. No, there are no wreaths or worn metal grills, or angels with heads inclined, willows and a wreath with golden thread, a candle that burns eternally. We moulder in pits smothered in lime, the wind rustles in our bones. Bleak skulls of hopelessness quiver on the barbed wire, and our ashes go to the four winds, scattered in thousands of urns. We make a chain around the earth, seeds dispersed by the winds. We count the days and years, we wait, time doesn't hurry us. And there are more and more of us down here. We swell and grow day by day. Your fields are already bloated with us, and one day your land will burst. And then we'll emerge in awful ranks, a skull on our skulls and bony shanks, and will roar in the faces of all the people, we the dead accused.
Dear Mr. Werner Reich, ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor for me to be here today and speak on behalf of the government of the Federal Republic of Germany. My country has a very dark past. One of the most horrible atrocities in human history was committed by Germans, the Holocaust. A crime against humanity that shall never be forgotten. Today, we are here to remember it. As it is commemorated every year in Germany. Remembering is important because we learn from the past, learn how things developed, how the Holocaust could happen, to make sure we prevent acts like this from ever happening again. Some may consider it unpatriotic to talk about the darkest times of your country's history. In Germany, we consider it very patriotic to do so, because it is for the good of our country and for our young generation, so that they know what can happen if you do not stand up for human rights and human dignity. The Holocaust is a story of endless suffering by innocent people, discriminated against only because they were Jewish, or Roma, or gay, or disabled, or just opposed the Nazi party. Millions of people mercilessly murdered in the gas chambers of Auschwitz and other concentration camps. But it is also a story of where things can lead when a society loses its values. of what can happen if things get out of control. When the Nazis came to power in 1933, people were confident that everything would get better. The economy was in a crisis. The Great Depression of 1929 had hit Germany hard. Unemployment was high. On top of that, many Germans still felt humiliated by the defeat in the First World War and the Treaty of Versailles forced upon them by the victorious powers. The Nazis promised to create jobs, to get the economy running, to lead Germany to international recognition again. But they had their own agenda. It turned out they did not consider the individual people and their needs. Everyone and everything was to serve the party and the country. People who expressed dissenting opinions were persecuted, and people who were perceived to be different, Jewish, Roma, disabled, were discriminated against and eventually mass murdered. At first, many Germans did not care, as long as things went well for themselves. Later, when it all got out of hand, even though a lot of people did not approve of the atrocities committed, no one was able to stop it anymore. The Nazis abolished everything that had made Germany a good place to live for everyone before. Democracy, human rights, the rule of law. With all these values suspended, nothing could stop them. Luckily, Germany lost the war in the end. It is hard to imagine what the world would look like today if it had ended differently. Today, we are proud to be a democratic country. Maybe democracy slows down decisions, but it is a value in itself. During the Nazi dictatorship, Germany was governed efficiently into disaster. Many people suffered, millions lost their lives efficiently. This is what can happen when values are lost. Efficiency is not a value in itself. Efficient rule of law is great. Efficient suppression of dissenting opinions is scary. That is why in Germany's post-war constitution, human rights come first. The very first article of the basic law of Germany states, human dignity shall be inviolable. So why does Germany today speak up against human rights violations anywhere in the world? Because we have learned the lesson from our own history. Today, we have a Holocaust survivor here who is going to share his story. Mr. Werner Reich, thank you very much for being here. Your personal story will give us all a better understanding of what actually happened and how we can prevent it from happening again. Because in the end, it all comes down to people. People who are responsible, people who went along, people who disapproved but did not do anything about it, and finally people who did something, who put themselves in danger for the right cause and saved many others. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Mr. Werner Reich. Please share your story with us. Ladies and gentlemen, give a warm welcome to Mr. Reich.
Good evening. Our holy book, the Torah, clearly commands us, take utmost care so that you do not forget the things that you saw with your own eyes, so that they do not fade from your mind as long as you live, and teach them to your children and your children's children. Fortunately, I have forgotten many of the things that I saw. I've forgotten them on purpose in order to move on. But some of the things that I still remember, I taught to my children and my children's children. And I'm still teaching them to over 15,000 other people's children each year. I'm teaching them about the blood, tears, and injustice the never-ending suffering and the heritage of the Holocaust. I'm teaching them about my experiences during the Holocaust. I'm teaching them about their responsibility and obligatory actions so that the Holocaust will never, ever happen again. On January 20th, 1942, that would be 76 years ago, in the magnificent ballroom of a private mansion in the Berlin suburb of Wannsee, a group of top SS executives met. They had a well-structured and calm meeting. Exactly 1 hour and 27 minutes later, please note the meticulous recording of this detail, a decision has been made. Because Jews were henceforth designated to be an inferior race, all 10 million Jews of Europe were to be destroyed. Destroy the men, women, and children. Murder their babies. Murder Jewish doctors, teachers, scientists, musicians, poets, and artists. Murder Nobel Prize winners and farmers. Simply murder them all and eliminate all traces of their culture and prior experience. 3 short years later, despite an ongoing war on many fronts, the Nazis had achieved 60% of their goal. Clearly, Nazi efficiency did not just stop with the brief length of the Wannsee meeting. The perpetrators called this genocide the final solution to the Jewish problem, and the victims called it the Holocaust, or Shoah in Hebrew, which simply means calamity in English. I'm not sure if anybody else in this room has been directly affected by this calamity, but those of us who survived it will never ever forget it. In 1933, when the calamity started, I was a typical, healthy, 5-year-old kid who lived in Berlin, Germany, who played with his toys and spoke only German. I had 2 parents. 12 years later, when it was over, I was a 17-year-old who lived in communist Yugoslavia, who spoke in addition to German, French, and Croat, had no parents, and instead of playing or going to school, had to find a way to find a place where to live and earn a livelihood. My parents were typical Western European Jews. They were totally assimilated. They had their priorities very clear. They were Germans first and Jews second. They were loyal to Germany, as Germany has, with minor exceptions, protected their Jews for nearly 500 years. During World War I, my mother had served in the German army as a nurse and had earned the Iron Cross. My father had been an officer in the Austro-Hungarian army, but both were loyal to the country where they lived. My father had 2 engineering degrees from the University of Berlin and made a very good living working for Siemens. We had a full-time maid, lived in a beautiful house, and life was good. And then Hitler came to power. Suddenly, a life of art and pleasure was turned into a life of fear, anguish, and despair. Within a few months, my father was told that his services were not needed anymore and that no other company in Germany would need him either. Not now, not ever in the future. We sold our house for next to nothing, packed up our things, and tried to leave Germany. At that point, the German government sprang into action and confiscated about 50% of our finances. And thus, with very few assets, we escaped 3 countries away to Yugoslavia. Obviously, a huge mistake, as the country was overrun a few years later by the very people who we were just escaping from. Anyway, my father had to find a way to make a living in a country that didn't need engineers, and the entire family had to learn a new language, Croat, a language that has an impossibly difficult grammar. My parents never managed it, while my sister and I spoke it within a year and attended local schools. And then my father got very sick. And while the family was struggling, Germany didn't. It marched into one country after another. By 1940, my father had died, and a year later, when I was 13, Germany marched into Yugoslavia. The new fascist government under Dr. Ante Pavelic made the Nazi military machine look like the Salvation Army. The Croat fascists, or the Ustaše, really didn't take any prisoners. Not only that they killed, but they truly enjoyed it and competed against each other in this pleasure. My mother, who felt safe because of the Iron Cross that she had earned by the German government during World War I, didn't worry about herself, my sister and myself. She placed my sister with a family who promised to take care of her. And then she placed me with a couple who were working for the resistance, the partisans. And so, for the next 2 years, I was hiding. I was in complete isolation from my mother and my friends, basically from all the people that I had known or that I was even familiar with. Whenever I tried to make a phone call to my friends, there was either no reply or a strange voice answered, probably someone who had brought about the death or disappearance of my friends and their family, who was now the proud owner of their possessions and apartment. I spent most of my time reading, cooking, or working in the bathroom, which had been converted into a dark room for photographic work, where the couple and I developed films for the resistance movement. In retrospect, it wasn't really very smart of my mother to hide me with people who were on top of the Gestapo wanted list. After 2 years in hiding, there was a knock at the door, and a bunch of Gestapo agents burst in, arrested the couple and me. They took me down to their temporary headquarters, and there, with long acquired skill and practice, beat the living daylights out of me. I got locked up in an empty basement cell that looked more like a tiger cage, although it was a converted coal cellar. Something that was especially designed for roving Gestapo agents. The only movable furnishing was a metal bucket to be used as a toilet. There was no bed or, for that matter, toilet paper in that room. After the first beating over the next 3 days, I was given one more. By that time, the Gestapo realized that I had absolutely no information that was of any value to them. They probably got it all from the couple with whom I had lived and who actually did have the information. I didn't know any of their contacts. After 3 days, I was transferred by car to a small border town between Croatia and Slovenia. It was a small wooden shed the size of a garden tool shed, which was used by the local police to lock up local regular drunks. The shed was furnished with nothing but a wooden shelf that acted as a table, chair, and bed. There were no blankets or pillows or tablecloths. In addition to these lavish furnishings, there were also 1 million fleas who shared the humble facilities. Fleas who were incredibly hungry or made my life unbearable. After 3 days of that dubious pleasure, I was transferred to the main police station of Graz, Austria, where I shared a small prison cell with 3 other boys. 2 had been caught stealing, and 1 had carelessly killed his mother. Despite the fact that these boys were actual criminals, I was treated as a true criminal because of my crime of being a Jew. After being in that prison for several weeks, I once looked from the window into the prison yard, and there I saw my mother in a gray prison dress, walking in circles around the yard. That was the last time I ever saw her. After 6 weeks in prison, I was transferred to Vienna, and from there to Terezin, Czechoslovakia. It was an old fortress that had been converted to a concentration camp that housed primarily Czech, German, and Austrian intelligentsia, men, women, and children. It was used by the Germans to demonstrate to the neutral countries that the Germans did not violate the Geneva Convention. In the camp, the conditions were bearable. There were no dead people visible. Anybody who died was quickly removed, as the Germans didn't want to even hint at the possibility that people die there. About 33,000 did die there, but about 88,000 were sent from there to their deaths in Auschwitz. While there, I had to work on railroad tracks, make baskets, exterminate vermin, and do many other tasks. I was there for 10 months, and during that period I had absolutely no contact with the outside. I knew nobody there and couldn't even communicate with most of them because of language differences. There were hardly any SS men visible, as the Nazis tried to give an image of benign tolerance. After being in Terezin for 10 months, my name came up to be transferred to another labor camp. Inasmuch as I had no possessions, I had no problem being prepared for this transfer. I and 2,500 other people lined up at the local railroad tracks to be loaded, 100 people at a time, into plain cattle cars. There was a bucket in each car, and that was it. The doors were locked, and we traveled for 3 days towards the new labor camp. Men, women, children, all packed in the cars, all of us using the same bucket, which after an hour overflowed. For the rest of the journey, we were laying in our feces and urine, and the stench was unbearable. Several people died in our car. After 3 days of travel, the train stopped, and they opened the doors, and we were immediately faced by a group of walking stick-wielding SS men and prisoners in striped uniforms. Welcome to Auschwitz. The men were separated from the women and children. We were herded into the camp, stripped, showered, and relieved of any body hair. The Germans were always fanatically scared of lice. After that, we stood in a long single line and just waited. At the end of the line, something was happening, but what, we didn't have the slightest idea. The line advanced very slowly, and suddenly we were facing a couple of prisoners sitting behind a long table. One was writing, as the other one grabbed our arm, took a long pin, and tattooed us. Now we were fully fledged Auschwitz prisoners, complete with tattoos and an infected arm. We were directed to various barracks, which must have been regular cattle stables. Inside were 3 tiered bunks, each level holding 6 prisoners. The place that should have held a mattress held instead a coarse bag filled with straw that was soaked with urine and feces. It was then that some of the older prisoners told us that we would be going through the chimney within 6 months' time. To us, this was a tasteless, stupid joke and added just more confusion to an already chaotic situation. It took me 3 solid weeks before I realized that they were telling the truth. But when we realized that this was the truth, It was as if an ice-cold hand reached into your chest and grabbed your heart. We were sentenced to death for a crime we did not commit. We are going to die. Many of us were teenagers. I was 16, filled with fear and desperate thoughts about survival. No room remained for compassion or outrage. Not much later, some of the other teenagers who were with me had to inhale the screams, smoke, and smell of their own killed and burned grandparents, parents, brothers and sisters, their family that had come with them to Auschwitz. But then we realized that it was the inescapable truth. We never spoke about this truth, yet it was constantly with us, day and night, and we were inescapable. In daytime, we were talking or working, and our attention was diverted by sound or sight. But at night, in deadly silence, with our eyes shut, we were lying squeezed next to each other. It was then that we were filled with a blind fear, a fear so immense that only a very, very big distance between us and the ovens could remove. The Hungarian Jews, who had arrived shortly after us, were taken to their slaughter directly from the trains. They never entered the camp. Luckily, they could not fathom what was in store for them. There was not enough time. Yet, according to some prisoners who had worked in the crematoria at that time, when the Hungarians realized what was happening, their last words were the Shema, the fundamental prayer of our faith. Hear, O Israel, our God is one. Very few of the SS men spoke Hungarian, so that only instructions that the poor souls received were in German. Schnell, los, los, fast, go, go. They couldn't be even fooled by the signs in German that said shower room. If it took us, inmates, weeks of constant exposure to disappearing lines and choking stench to understand what was going on a few hundred yards from us, how could the immediately intended victims grasp their fate? On the other hand, the Roma and Sinti, the gypsies who had been in the camp for some time, they knew what to expect. They had not been separated from their families. Neither the men nor their women were ever intended to be used for work. They were there only to be killed, thereby assuring the purity of the German race. They stayed together with their children and families, and when there was a gap in the arrival of the Hungarian Jews, it was then that the Roma and Sinti were gassed and burned. And the flames of their burnt bodies rose through the square chimneys, high into the air, lighting up the night sky, while their smoke was mixed with that of the Hungarian Jews and prisoners of war from nations from all over Europe, then settled on us, the terrified, waiting for our own death. The food consisted of a daily ration of 2 slices of bread made of flour and sodas, and 2 bowls of soup made of salt water, and a few small pieces of unwashed potatoes, complete with sand and sometimes substituted by nettles or some little pieces of turnips. 3 times a day we had to stand in line to be counted, and if one person out of 5,000 was missing, we had to stand and do sport. That means we had to do push-ups, jumping, or some other physically exhaustive exercise, an exercise that guaranteed the death of many prisoners. One day, Dr. Mengele came into our camp. He was a German SS doctor who specialized in the racial purity of the German people and who specialized in conducting experiments on twins and dwarfs. He was also known as the Angel of Death. All the boys between the ages of 12, who were actually the youngest in the camp, and the age of 18, had to strip naked and run past him. We were running for our lives. We tried to look taller, healthier, stronger. Anything that could save our life, because we knew that those who didn't pass his inspections were condemned to death. Dr. Mengele stood there with a bunch of SS men, and we're telling jokes as we frequently bursting into loud, coarse laughter. Occasionally Dr. Mengele nodded his head or casually waved his hand, and one of the boys would be moved from the line and placed aside. After 3 times running past the doctor, there were 89 of us on one side and the remaining 5,000 on the other. We, 89, were sent to another camp, and the other 5,900 were sent to the gas chambers overnight, next 5 days. Of the 89, 46 survived the war. 46 out of 5,000. I was sent to Auschwitz I, where all the criminals from the penitentiaries resided. Criminals who had been brought into the camp to act as internal guards, as supplements to the SS. There I worked in the stables, cleaning and feeding the horses of the SS officers. I had a great fringe benefit. In addition to working in heated stables, I could eat the dried sugar beets, the food that they gave to the horses. It was far, far better than the camp food. In January 1945, as the Russians advanced, 60,000 of us prisoners were given a slice of bread, and we started on one of the deadliest death marches in Nazi history. We walked for 3 days, during which time 15,000 died. We were then loaded into open railroad cars and traveled for 4 days, during which time many thousands died. We ended up in the Mauthausen, Austria concentration camp. It was probably one of the worst Nazi camps. Prisoners were worked to death, or they were forced to what the Nazis laughingly referred to as parachute jumping without a parachute from the top of a cliff. 3 days after my arrival, my feet started to rot from the frostbite I had received during the railroad ride, and a Serbian prisoner of war who had been a doctor before the war cut off my toes on one foot and thus saved my life. A couple of months later, the Russians were advancing from the east and the American forces from the west. We were squeezed between these two forces and were stranded without food. The only food we got was a tablespoon of moldy bread a day. I slept next to a dead man for 3 days just to get his ration. There were cases of cannibalism in the camp. Many thousands died during that time. Their bodies were just strewn all over the place. In the end, we didn't have the strength to lift them and throw them in a pile. There were many diseases rampant in the camp. On the 5th of May 1945, we were liberated by American forces. I was 17 years old and weighed 29 kilos. After several weeks, I was able to go back home to nothing. I had no education, no skills, and no means. I had no home, no family, no friends. On Memorial Day, I mourn for all of these victims, the old people, the little children. I mourn for the pregnant women, the twins and dwarfs used by Dr. Mengele for his experiments, the soldiers, the handicapped. I mourn for my mother. Yet I frequently do cry when I think of them, because they have been denied the great joy that we get from the beauty of nature, the pleasures of life. And I also miss them. They all deserve to be honored on this day and every other day. On this day, I not only think about the dead, but I also think about the indifference that prevailed throughout the world during the Holocaust. Without this indifference, the Holocaust would have never been possible. While millions were being persecuted and murdered, huge nations and whole continents simply shut their eyes and ears to the plight of the victims. When in 1938, 32 nations met to decide as to who would take some refugees, only one tiny nation, the Dominican Republic, decided to help, that purely for prejudicial reasons. It took less than 1,000 Jews, less than 1,000%. Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and Canada refused. Actually, the Canadian representative set the tone for the entire conference when he declared, "Let the Germans solve their Jewish problem." In other words, let the murderer take care of his victim's problem. And he did. At that time, to associate your name with helping Jews was considered political suicide. In other words, I'm better off saving my job than somebody's life. No bombs ever fell on Auschwitz, on the Auschwitz barracks, train tracks, or crematoria, as, according to official records, the Allied troops had to concentrate on military targets, and Auschwitz was a civilian matter. Although they bombed Auschwitz III, which was a synthetic rubber factory and was only 5 miles or 1 minute flight time from the crematoria, I think about it. Just one single tiny minute and one single small bomb on the train tracks, and that on a location that had absolutely no military defense. When there was talk in Britain about the feasibility of bombing the crematoria, some clergymen strenuously objected, no, don't bomb. Somebody might get hurt. While we blame non-European countries for their indifference, many European countries participated with gusto in the Jew hunt. There was only one country under German occupation that did not have Nazi killer troops. That country was Bulgaria. Even Denmark had local Nazi killer troops. While the Danish people managed to save most of their Jews, Bulgaria and Albania saved all of theirs. Actually, there were more Jews in Bulgaria after the war than before. These countries showed us that human decency is not just an occasional event. It is there if it is taught and just needs to be combined with leadership and courage. People need to remind each other. In the French valley of Le Chambon, under Nazi government, the local minister, a Huguenot whose people had been persecuted in the past, appealed to his congregants, and all participated in the rescue of about 5,000 Jews. Every single person in the valley risked their lives for years, skimped on food, and provided shelter to the persecuted. These were the only large European community efforts, not efforts by governments or individuals, that I'm familiar with that saved the persecuted. Sure, there were many private schools, monasteries, and other institutions that were involved in the rescues. But all of these people lived under one roof and had strong leadership. But two whole countries, a whole valley, would we ever see it again, or was it just a flash in the pan? When in 1993, some 50 years after the Holocaust, in Billings, Montana, in America, a member of the local clan threw a brick through the window of a house that had displayed a menorah. It was then that the local newspapers and churches got involved. They decided, not in our town. Consequently, all the homes in Billings displayed pictures of menorahs. This simple step immediately stopped all further anti-Semitic activities. I am not aware of any other mass boycott since the Holocaust, although there had been murders of gays and immigrants which only created headlines. There were no mass boycotts in towns, no mass boycotts in colleges, just a few meetings declaring opposition to the acts. I am on purpose not including the recent riot in Charlottesville, as it consisted of locals and outsiders, with the local police being onlookers. But as you can see, full community activity is possible in the most unlikely places, and the results are breathtaking. In today's world, where more and more children state on their school registration NORA, no organized religious affiliation, the teaching of ethics is slowly falling by the wayside. And this worries me, as there are times when political speeches, military commands, or commercial appeals must be overridden by a higher authority. What do we do if it isn't there, or nobody can hear it? Today, we do not face any major calamities, but we are in the process of creating one. And when the next calamity faces us, we will be even less prepared than the last time. Instead of having learned that involvement is necessary, we look at calamities more as a nuisance, an inconvenience, to some even as an unknown, and then conveniently ignore them. Or maybe just take lots of pictures with our cell phones. How do we teach involvement to our children? How can we show it to them by example? How will our children teach involvement to our children's children if they never learned it? So today, on this United Nations Holocaust Memorial Day, let us mourn not only the deaths of the millions, but also the death of caring for others at that time. The calamity of indifference. As Dr. Martin Luther King so beautifully said, in the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. He was right. I cannot remember what Hitler had said, but I can still hear the silence of the German people when Hitler declared open season on us Jews. I can still clearly hear the sound of the many countries slamming the doors to freedom into our face. If there would not have been indifference, there would not have been a Holocaust. Some of us experienced it, but I pray never again. Thank you very much.
Around the world and in Hong Kong for the last 6 years, each year during the Holocaust Memorial Day commemoration, 6 candles are lit in memory of the 6 million Jews who were senselessly killed in the Holocaust. Among them, 1 million children who perished. May the memory of these innocent victims be forever preserved. Tonight, the first candle will be lit in honor of the righteous among the nations. This year, Israel dedicated to the righteous among the nations and to the Holocaust survivor, whose courage and resilience inspired us. For the survivors, among them, my grandmother, Rita Machlin Zichrona Livracha, of whom I'll be thinking in the minute of silence to follow the candlelighting ceremony, grappling with the loss and the moral collapse during the Holocaust in an ongoing challenge and obligation for humanity worldwide. In a special gesture this year, the Hong Kong Holocaust Intolerance Center decided to light a 7th candle in memory of the victims of Nanjing massacre and contemporary genocides. As many in the audience are aware, it was recently the 80th anniversary of the Nanjing massacre. We will now commence the lighting. Each candle lighter will also read a special dedication, the content of which can be found in your program. Thank you.
For the righteous among the nations, thou shalt not be a victim, thou shalt not be a perpetrator, but above all, thou shalt not be a bystander.
For the resistance in ghettos, monsters exist, but they are too few in number to be truly dangerous. More dangerous are the common men, the functionaries ready to believe and to act without asking questions.
For the women in the Holocaust. When we were in the barrack where Mengele was doing the selection, we knew about the gassing and thought it would be it. My mother got this tiny lipstick out and made my face nice and red, and hers too. We had a little more flesh on our bodies, and she pushed me into the skeletons, people who were just skin and bones. She pushed me there, knowing that they took the better looking ones on one side and the really bad skeletons on the other. My mother was marvelous, her wits and everything. She knew that the people who were fitter looking might still serve a purpose.
In every ghetto, in every deportation train, in every labor camp, even in the death camps, the will to resist was strong and took many forms. Fighting with the few weapons that would be found, individual acts of defiance and protest, the courage of obtaining food and water under the threat of death, the superiority of refusing to allow the Germans their final wish to gloat over panic and despair.
For the spiritual resistance. When you are waiting for miracles and nothing happens, you can't find any drive within yourself. I have so often wondered whether Germany will win this war. The Jews seem so sure that England is stronger, but that's because if the Germans win, we will not be permitted to live. But such a reason is no proof that one side or the other will win. Whoever wins is no longer important to me. The main thing is that we Jews will be redeemed and rescued from the troubles of our times. I am very tired. Good night, my people.
For the 6 million victims, blessed is the match consumed in kingdom flame. Blessed is the flame that burns in the secret fastness of the heart. Blessed is the heart with strength to stop its beating for honor's sake. Blessed is the match consumed in kingdom flame.
For the Nanjing Massacre and contemporary genocides. 我唔知點解冇人嚟幫我哋，點解我哋被遺棄？呢一切實在叫人難以忍受。到處充斥痛苦、飢餓同死亡，而所有人都好似沉默。我哋被孤立，我陰人。呢啲班柬埔寨大屠殺恨主席，而家係柬埔寨大屠殺嘅重要見證人同埋紀錄片製作人。I didn't understand why no one came to our aid, why we were abandoned. It was unbearable. The suffering, the hunger, the death everywhere. And everybody remained silent. We were alone, and I wept. Ritipan, survivor of the Cambodia genocide, now an important filmmaker and memorist of the genocide.
Would you please all stand for a moment of silence? Thank you. גדל והתקדש שמי רבה, בעלמא דיברך קירותה, וימליך מלכותה, וישמח פוקנה, ויקרב משיחה. בחייכון וביומכון, ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהא שמי רבה מבורך לעלמל מעלמיה, יתברך וישתבח, ויתפאר ויתרומם, ויתנשא ויתהדר, ויתעלה ויתהלל, שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מכל ברכתה, שירתה ותשפחתה, באמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. יהא שלמה רבה משמיה, חיים בסבה בישועה ונחמה, ושזפה ורפואה, וגאולה וסליחה וכפרה, ורווח והצלה לנו ולכל עמו ישראל ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו וברחמיו, יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ואמרו אמן. Thank you. Please be seated.
Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you all for joining this ceremony, and we hope you found the event moving and interesting. We here tonight can count ourselves amongst the privileged in Hong Kong to hear the first-hand testimony of a Holocaust survivor, and we trust that you all found the experience memorable. To have a 90-year-old survivor fly from New York to Hong Kong to speak to our community is truly a rare and fortunate experience for us. We would like to thank Werner and his son David for making the long journey here to give his personal testimony. We also thank all the readers and musicians for their excellent performances, as well as the Elsa High School students who are helping us this evening. As mentioned before, we are taking Werner Reich to a variety of schools and universities in Hong Kong and Macau this week. This evening's ceremony is an example of a public educational event that we organize along with school talks and teacher workshops throughout the year. In your program, you will find a pledge card, and if you are moved by the value of our mission in organizing such events and visits and ensuring they are ongoing in the future, please fill in the card and place it in one of the boxes the students outside the hall are holding as you exit. Alternatively, you can also simply place any cash donations in the same boxes. The Holocaust was a turning point in history, which prompted the world to say, never again. We must remember the crimes of the past with an eye towards preventing them in the future. Many thanks, and we wish you all a safe journey home.